You know what they say. When you're a child, your parents tell you that you can be whatever you want when you grow up. We've all been through this before. As children, we want to be the next NFL quarterback, the next Brad Pitt, or maybe even Superman. However, as we are conditioned through school, all those hopes and aspirations simply dissolve away into nothingness, like a sugar cube into a cup of lemon tea. Corporate business farms the youthful motivation, turning society into a puppet with the strings played by lucky ones who are able to get ahead due to their fat father's wallet raising their status in society. How do you go from dreaming of being on top of the world to working your ass off for a degree in accounting? In school, I was never the best student. I was always considered more intelligent than my peers, but my apathy took over. I remember my parents' concerned faces when confronted by my 500-pound math teacher during student conferences, his jowls flapping uncontrollably as his plump lips spewed out the words, "Your son has potential. He just doesn't use it." I never tried in school. What was the point? My parents first met during graduation, as one was a valedictorian and the other was a salutatorian. Where did they end up? Working some mundane, life-sucking office job. I knew no matter what, I too would end up doing something I didn't care about. Sure, I could have developed some amazing talent to bring me to stardom, but why bother? You're discouraged from following your passions anyways, once you figure out that 99% of the people fall short of actually going through with their dreams. 1989 was the year I graduated high school. As I headed out of my putrid hell of school with my diploma in my grubby hand, I knew I was set to do absolutely nothing with my life, that is. While the masses around me strutted out with high hopes, viewing their puny slip of paper as some kind of monumental achievement to set them for life, I stood there stone-faced. I was ready to get on with the rest of my life. What's the point of celebrating when I knew I would be working with just about all these people? The lucky ones dropped out, but my parents would never let me do that. Pollutes the gene pool, as my dear father would say. I have a rather pessimistic view on life, but hey, I wouldn't think this way if it weren't the truth. Just look around you. It's true, whether you like it or not. You would be surprised to know that I'm actually married in life. I even had some children as well. A couple years after high school ended, I married my sweetheart, who was just as pessimistic as I am. I worked a few odd jobs to tide things over. A couple times we had to flee our apartment because either we couldn't scrape enough dough to get by, or that we found out our landlord was a sex offender spying on my wife. Low-income apartments just weren't doing it for us. With children on the way to be born into this disgrace of a planet, we needed a better living situation. The two of us working endless nights delivering pizzas or driving some drunk beer bellies home just wasn't cutting it. We needed better jobs. Thus started our job searching journey. After countless searching, my wife was able to snatch up a decent job. Pay was acceptable, good benefits. What more could you ask for? The problem, though, is that I couldn't work there, as the place was filled with stubborn, balding men who'd only give up their job once they dropped dead. With her in a decent place of employment, I had to remain searching for one of my own. It wasn't easy. It took quite a bit of internet searching and snagging up every newspaper I could get my hands on to do it, but I found one. Yes, I was finicky in my searches. I just didn't want to spend my days growing old while plunging some greasy bald man's toilet. Decent jobs are hard to find without an expensive and worthless piece of paper with the prestigious college name printed on the top. Nonetheless, I found one. It was a customer service job at some office building on the outskirts of town. It wasn't pretty, and it certainly wasn't fun, but it offered some sustainable pay. So I applied and was eventually asked for an interview. After some mind-numbingly boring weeks later, I was given the job. All I had to do was just sign my life away via contract. Satisfied, I was able to rest peacefully, knowing that between my wife and myself, we would finally be able to move into an actual house together. Ah, my first day in the job. Oh, endless training. I chuckled to myself as the person training me was our school's valedictorian. That 4.0 GPA really served him well. Something was odd about him, however. He was one of those boisterous fellows that you couldn't shut up for 1 minute. Quite an annoying person when you think about it. He was full of life, energy, and optimism. Someone who was deemed full of potential. In fact, he was voted most likely to succeed in high school. Now here he was, working in some dreadful office. As I mentioned, something was off about him. He spoke little, and when he did, it was monotonous, and actually put you to sleep. He was the exact opposite of what he was when I knew him. At the same time, I didn't think too much of it. The daily grind, am I right? The first day on the job was quite possibly the worst day of my entire existence. But hey, only uphill from there. Boy, was I wrong. To be honest, I had never heard of his company before in my life. Other people apparently have, though. Every day and all day was nothing but call after call. These people would ask questions so dumb that I pondered violently, throwing myself out the window. Have I mentioned it was endless? I spent most of the day with my eyes locked into the clock, my dreary lookers staring at the pathetic hands slowly creeping around. It was almost like they moved at such slow speeds just to spite me. Work was only 9 to 5, but it felt like an eternity. There was nothing like I had experienced before. The weight of the burden was enough to completely throw out my back, and the strain started turning my hairs gray in only 10 years. Yeah, a whole decade of doing this. 10 years of me practically ripping my hair out, trying to service the old morons who didn't have the brains to think for themselves. They seriously had to go out of their way, using their shaky and withering hands to helplessly dial my sad soul up to ask a question that made me pray for my death. The strain was unusual. I've worked many odd jobs before, but none quite as stressful as this. Yes, this was in fact more straining than working at a summer camp counselor, dealing with snotty, bratty kids. This was much different than that. My wife noticed significant changes in me as well. I was 28 years old and I looked like I was in my 50s. I would go walking with my wife and kids and people would ask if I was the grandfather to my children. Man, the weird looks I got when I said I was the father. They would look at my young and healthy wife and compare her to me, a crusty, old, withered man. At the time, I didn't think too much about this. I figured this job was no more stressful than any other office work at this caliber. I also blamed genetics. Well, my parents got old and crotchety fast. I talked with my doctor, but he didn't have any explanation. I just figured it was perfectly normal. Just my parents' horrible elderly genes. I had breaks like anyone else. However, I would end up getting out of that hole of sadness whenever I had the opportunity. It wasn't until one day where I decided to stick around just for shits and giggles. I decided to spend my precious lunch break in our very own break room. As I sat in my cubicle packing my shit, I looked into the endless sea of cubicles. I never realized just how old my coworkers looked. That 4.0 guy that trained me in? Yeah, he looked like a grandfather too, just like me. Had the personality of one as well. Many of my classmates work here, and I noticed the same thing from them. Something was odd to me now. My decaying mind worked its hardest to piece together this phenomenon. Granted that myself and my former classmates were almost 30, none of us looked it. I get that this is a stressful job, but then again, my wife complained more than I do about her job, and she looked better than ever, and her coworkers as well, the younger ones at least. In fact, I've never seen a single classmate outside of this office that looked quite like us. How have I not noticed this before? I guess I never really thought about it until this moment, but when I did, I needed a seat. I sat alone in the break room. It was desolate. I could hear furious sounds of typing coming from the cubicle area, as well as countless phone calls. The break room was in need of a little love. The windows were cracked from idiotic birds smacking into it, killing themselves. The horrendous fluorescent lights were flickering on the brink of croaking. Paper cups spilled on the floor beneath the 10-gallon water dispenser. This place was quite literally a dump. No wonder why no one uses it. I sipped away on my tiny Dixie cup of water. I just thought. It wasn't until my cheap little wristwatch beeped to me that break was over that I broke out of this deep state of pondering. With the frustration that I had to go back to work, I hurled the pathetic paper cup toward the trash can, missing by a few inches. Deciding that I should have at least a little decency, I went in to retrieve it and properly dispose of it in the filthy puke green bin. Right as I plopped it in, however, I noticed a crumpled piece of paper. It wouldn't have sparked my attention if it weren't for the fact that the phrase, "No end in sight," was chicken scratched on it. This clearly wasn't a normal business letter, as that phrase served no purpose in our line of work. It looked old as well. In fact, everything in the trash was yellowing, as if I hadn't been emptied in years. Out of curiosity, I ruined whatever scrap of dignity I had left by digging in the garbage to read what probably was something out of context. To my surprise, it wasn't. I could tell that the person was writing fairly fast, as the handwriting was comparable to a second-grade dropout in a speed writing contest. It was hard to read. The letter itself appeared to be a note to someone else. Except the most important part of it was the ending. Just when I was wondering why the person took time out of his miserable existence to write this, I found the answer. The bottom read along the lines of, "There is no end in sight. I'm stuck in the job for the rest of my life." It didn't seem too bad. I felt the same way. However, as I continued reading it, it read, "I'm probably going to be purged for saying this, but just know that this office literally sucks the life out of you. It needs to be shut down fast, but our hands are tied. If any of us say anything, we are disposed of." The letter then proceeded to move onto a tangent about how much he loves this woman and that he will miss her. What was the point of this letter? Why was it in the trash and not mailed out? Who was this person? Thoughts swirled in my mind unanswered. I examined the piece of pulp further to see if there was any information about this man. On the back was a stamped address, which I presumed to be where his wife had lived. Judging by the age the letter appeared to be, it was most likely in there for years, as no one has bothered to take out the trash in that time. Maybe it was a good thing that no one uses that break room. Otherwise, I wouldn't have found a gem like that. As I was lost in thought, my watch still buzzing at me, I heard a pitter-patter. Of course, for the first time ever, some fat ass decides to waddle on in for a mediocre cup of joe to swill down his gullet. I panicked and shoved the letter back into the trash just as he entered. God, I must have looked like an idiot. Here I am, kneeling on the floor like I'm proposing to my imaginary friend Betty, staring into a trash can like a loony. My coworker didn't question it, though. He was so brain dead that I could have been a dancing raccoon doing backflips, and he wouldn't bat a heavy eye. I left the letter. I figured that judging by how the trash was never emptied by our lazy-ass janitor, it would be there when I need it. Besides, I got the most important information at the end anyway. I went back to work feeling an emotion other than being bored to tears. I decided when I got home that I would look up the address in the phone book. It took a bit of searching, but since we had lived in a relatively small town, it wasn't too hard to find. The name of the residency was Jill Holgan. It would have been awkward to call her asking about her husband. For all I know, she could have been a new person that just moved into that address. I decided that it would be in my interest to confirm that the note was indeed from her husband before I take any action. But it was the weekend, so I would hold everything aside and try to drink my worries away. The weekend was a particularly bad one. On Saturday, my wife burst in teary-eyed, calling my name as if some psycho killer in bondage broke through the window and snatched up the children and flew to Mexico. Thinking that it was probably some hairy spider that slipped into her bathrobe that I needed to exterminate, I slowly waddled my grandpa body into the bedroom. She was sitting on the bed, dabbing at her face with some tissues, sobbing while holding the local newspaper. Probably not a spider. Damn, she probably was felt up by that creepy-ass boss of hers with the bulging eyes. I could vividly picture his nostrils flared and eyes peeled back touching her delicate skin. I, of course, asked what was wrong. She handed me a cutout of the newspaper. I glanced it over. It was an obituary of the valedictorian, my coworker. She dated him back in high school for a bit, and even remained friends after they had broken up. I myself didn't care for him. I was kind of glad that the greasy weasel was done for. The newspaper stated that he had died of natural causes. What in the hell? He's not even 30 years old. Sure, he gained a lot of weight from eating that morning slop at that dinky fast food joint, but he still was young. I, alas, still gave my wife my condolences, and spent the remainder of the weekend comforting her through her time of mourning. That Monday, I hammered away the usual workload before break time finally poked its head around. I slithered into the break room to claim it before anyone else. Sure enough, the letter was still there in its crumpled glory. Feeling a bit groggy from the daily grind, I caved into the temptation of drinking that worthless coffee farmed by poor children roped into slavery in another country. As my cup was brewing, I noticed that there sat a thick, dusty book from a few years ago. It was a yearbook, with everyone in the office including it. Ugh, how drab. But an idea sparked my mind. Holgan is a last name that I had never heard of before. Chances are that it's not that common. I decided that I could maybe find someone by that name to figure out if there was any relation to Jill. The book was almost as endless as the job itself. Page after page of people wearing white dress shirts and tie, and the look of burden on their faces. Ah, the nostalgia of the first week of work. In fact, my picture was in there as well. After my little tangent, I got down to business and flipped right to the H's. I swear that just about every last name in existence is in this book. As I scanned the sea of fugly faces getting closer and closer to the name Holgan, I was stopped. Right between the last name Holden and Holland was a picture and a name covered in what appeared to be whiteout. Why? I half-assedly scanned the rest of the book and found that other people were blanked out as well. I stared blankly at what possibly was Mr. Holgan's face. I needed to scrape it off to be sure. Who was this person? Could it actually be the husband of Jill Holgan? Or was it some flatfoot who had a name that happened to fall between Holden and Holland? I hurriedly searched the room like a drug dog on a mission for something that could scrape off the correctional fluid. To my luck, I found a putty knife used by the janitor to scrape the gum off the desks. Yes, even grown adults still do that. I carefully scratched away at the film and revealed the name, Jack Holgan. At this point, I felt uneasy. What happened to him? And perhaps I was being illogical. He probably quit in the last few years and was going through a divorce, and this letter was a metaphor for something. For all I know, some purple dinosaur could have farted him away to another galaxy. No matter what I tried to convince myself, I still felt uneasy. But alas, my break was over. It was time to get back to answering calls about the most trivial problems known to man. I must be the dumbest person to ever exist. I realized once I got back to my desk that I had forgotten to grab the letter out of the trash. I was planning on dropping it off in his wife's mailbox that night. I wasn't able to stop back in the break room until the next day because the assistant manager watched us like a slimy-eyed fatso in a pie shop. We were only allowed in there on break. No exceptions. Not even if you forgot your pen in there. I suppose it was years of misbehaving employees goofing off like jackasses which caused this rule, but nonetheless, I had to abide by it. While I silently screamed at my desk, getting ready to pow the next person I see in the face, I calmed down. I simply would wait until the next day. As the day rolled to a close and the phones were unplugged for the night to stop the ignorant callers, I was packing up my sorry ass to go home and relax up until the next day, where the same chain of events would happen all over again. Before I could leave, I was stopped by the assistant manager. He was about as ugly as a person could be. He explained to me that throughout my decade of working at this shithole wasting my life away, that I earned a promotion. Yippee! Nope, not a much-needed vacation, but a promotion. God, I couldn't even remember the last time I went on a trip. I so badly wished that he would say that I could have traveled to the Bahamas. But no, a promotion. With a catch. Our company worked in weird ways. To take this promotion, I would have to prove that I was worthy of it. To be deemed the chosen one. I would have to temporarily spend both day and night on the upper floors of the building. Some sort of initiation to prove that we could handle a heavier workload. Now, I worked here for a decade, and I would rather scrub the toilets with my own toothbrush than to spend another minute taking calls. The promotion initiation, as it was called, was a 2-week period of nonstop work. We would be evaluated based on performance through a lengthy list of menial tasks. As I mentioned, it was both night and day, so it essentially was a giant slumber party for adults, but with work. Pay was an improvement from before, and if I was able to prove myself and earn the promotion, I would be paid better and do less horrible work. So 2 weeks of nonstop work for an improvement of my situation? Bring it on. Sure, the promotion would still be a sucky job, but at least I would be paid more. The last day of the 2-week period was a full 24-hour break in the office to study the building inside and out while the higher-ups debated who would earn the promotion. I told my wife about the deal, and she was ecstatic. With the extra cash, we could afford luxuries that we could never have before. My kids could finally get that pool that they wanted. We could all enjoy our summers swimming together. It was the first time I actually felt optimistic about something. The thought of coming home after a long day and just floating on my back with the kids wrestling around the yard, my wife chatting up the neighbor, sounded pleasant to me. I took the offer willingly and told my kids that I would be gone for a bit, but when I came back, they would have a new pool. My family hugged me as I packed a suitcase for the next 2 weeks. The initiation period began promptly. In fact, it was the very next day. I would be on a completely different floor of the building that whole time, so there goes any possibility of retrieving that letter. Besides, I wasn't allowed to leave the assigned area anyways. I was stuck in a room with about 14 other guys. All were homely as hell and just about as withered as I was. My guess was that these people started working around the same time I did. None of us said a word. We all stood around stiffly and awkwardly waiting for somebody to come in and give us our tasks. During this time, I began to think about the letter. What did Jack mean by purging? He said that he would be purged if anyone knew what he was scribbling. I was curious about his story. What happened to him, and where is he now? I was interrupted by the manager barreling down the hall like he owned the place. He actually looked nicer than all of us. While all of us were in our 30s, balding and our hair graying, He was about 40 and looked great. He wore a nicer business suit in contrast with our tacky dress shirts and tie. He also had a full head of natural black hair. He talked boldly and confidently, far different from our increasingly shrill voices. Voice. That was another thing I was experiencing. My previous deep and dramatic voice became more shrill and with warble. It wasn't just me either. It was everyone I worked with. Almost sheepish in a way. The man himself was about as interesting as playing solitaire as a professional sport. We were again stuck doing horrible busy work. We took calls, filed papers away, cleaned, painted, the whole 9 yards. The food we were fed was disgusting. It reminded me of my school days where we were fed the grime from underneath the lunch lady's sweaty ass. We tossed it out to the hobos out back in the dumpsters. Someone would love to eat it. We barely slept, and when we did, it was on the floor. Throughout the whole process, the thought of new luxuries to stall my shallow, consumerist, and simplistic little mind was enough to keep me motivated. I was always quicker than most of the people around me. While I figured out the tasks pretty easily and completed them in a timely manner, everyone else scrambled like a headless chicken escaping from a rapist without a clue what was going on. Not everyone could handle the pressure. Within the first week, 3 people were removed. The second week, more. What was interesting, though, was the fact that these people were ushered out through a different door than the one we entered. They would be accompanied by the manager, as well as some buff and shady-looking fellows. The room they entered had a solid metal door, with the cracks around it sealed up. At first, I didn't think too much of it, but the more I was able to look at the metal door, I felt curious. What was in there? Why was it sealed up? Where were these people going? Another interesting point I noticed was the people who ended up in there. We had many who sucked at what they were doing, but they weren't the ones that were escorted out. The people who were leaving were the outspoken ones. I guess the constant pressure cracked some people to curse out against their superior. I would have loved to do the same, but the idea of a pool fixed me. I began to wonder about Jack again. Throughout the work, I couldn't keep him off my mind. I'm not sure why, but I began to wonder if he somehow ever was in the same place I was. I had the horrible thought that he could have been one of those people escorted out and possibly destroyed. I mean, they're so secretive about it. Those people seem to share the same feelings about work as he did. Again, I was being irrational, but I wanted to find out what happened to these folks who were deemed unworthy. As the 2 weeks drew closer to an end, we had about half of the 14 left. My curiosity had driven me to try and find out what was going on with the workers who were expelled. Mark was one of the guys with us who grew closer and closer to his breaking point. He was some obnoxious dick that was constantly getting into shit he wasn't supposed to. All he had to do was just explode, and I could just so happen to be sweeping over by the mysterious metal doors and peer in. The task list was posted on the door we came in from. It had a list of jobs that someone would just sign off on. I took it that Mark wanted something easier, so he was going for sweeping duty. I was the asshole that swooped in there just before him and snatched it up. That was enough to break him. He bitched and moaned that this employment was never-ending work, and that the superiors should go fuck themselves. I had never heard anyone so livid in my entire life. It was a matter of moments before the babbling idiot would be escorted away. I grabbed the broom and scurried over to where the metal doors were, and began sweeping furiously as the manager and his patsies strolled in to take care of the 30-year-old man-child having a temper tantrum. The only piece of technology we had were Palm Pilot personal digital assistants and headphones. They were given to us with some pre-installed music to tie us over while we work. I hurriedly packed the headphones over my ears and got back to sweeping with my back facing towards the metal doors. Sure enough, the manager and his minions ushered Mark over to where I was. As they entered the door, I glanced out the corner of my eye to see what they were doing. I could see in the distance what looked to be a factory. I had worked an odd job in a slaughterhouse before, and what I saw behind me was identical to that. I only caught a glimpse, though, as the door slammed shut and sealed. I crept over to the now closed doors to see if I could hear anything. Nothing. In one swift motion, I clawed my shoelaces to become undone. I will make it seem like I was simply tying my shoes so no one would be suspicious. I leaned my ear against the door as I slowly formed the knots of my laces, and I could ever so faintly hear what was happening inside. I heard some yelling, then what sounded like a chainsaw. A similar sound to the meat grinder that I had heard back in my slaughterhouse days. No way. No, it must have been coincidence. My mind instantly jumped to conclusions. How would a company like this get away with murder? The police would investigate and bust his place down. Again, I realized I was being irrational, but at the same time, however, I was completely convinced that Mark was nothing more than ground meat. I was petrified. But I couldn't let that show. I continued sweeping and carrying out my tasks. Good thing this initiation period was almost over. The final day arrived. We were given a 24-hour break period to do whatever we wanted. We were given the luxury to leave this godforsaken initiation floor and explore just about every area in the whole building. Granted, some rooms such as administrative offices, as well as others, were forbidden. This includes the factory room. However, I can now freely go into the break room with Jack Holgan's letter. The reason we were given this luxury for exploration was that we would be promoted to more authority-driven positions that required us to know how to get around. Essentially a DIY tour. I had never been higher than the second floor of this massive building, so I needed to be acquainted. I spent all day wandering around, checking in and out of the various seas of cubicles to find nothing worth noting. I was simply killing time until everyone went home and I could spend the night in the break room. At least that place had a comfy computer chair instead of sleeping on the floor like these last 2 weeks. I eventually made my way down to the break room. I looked in the trash and sure enough, I saw the letter. I hadn't moved 1 inch from where I left it. I was about to read it over again when, to my dismay, the handsome manager popped in the room. I practically leaped out of my skin, but instinctively dropped the letter back in and dove down to tie my shoes that had become undone throughout the course of the day. Luckily, he hadn't noticed my cover-up. He gave me an odd look, and without saying a word, plopped a brand new yearbook right on top of the old, dusty one. He acknowledged my existence with a simple nod and headed out. I scampered over to the yearbook and flipped through. I found my ugly mug in there, of course. I looked for Jack Holgan, but he wasn't in there, of course. I mean, his face was blank previously out, so why keep printing him in, right? I then thought of Mark. I flickered through the pages, searching for him like a parent through their son's web history, and found him. Or what used to be him. His picture and name had a fresh layer of whiteout. I set the book down while rubbing my eyes. I also noticed that the older yearbook was in a different position than when I had first read it. I looked through there and found that his face was blanked out in that one as well. Now I was pissed. I tossed down both books and went back to the trash. There were many crumpled up pieces of paper in it. I was curious to know if there were more letters like Jack's. I grabbed one that was yellowing on the sides. Nothing. It was just a discarded copy of something unimportant. I opened up another piece. Same thing. I dug in even deeper and pulled out a third piece of paper. To my luck, it was another letter. Eerily similar to Jack's. It was addressed to someone and had many of the key points that were seen in Jack's. Endless work, purging, etc. Why was this in here? So many questions filled my mind. There was a name included, which was, of course, blanked out in the yearbook. Upon fishing around further, I found several others. Same story, yet no definitive answers. The office has more than one break room. I decided that I should investigate and figure out if the other break rooms are like this. I explored one on each floor and found the same thing. Why? That was the question that kept nagging at me. What really got me, though, was the trash can on the initiation floor. I examined that one and found it completely empty except for one note. This one was from Mark. His note was considerably shorter than most people's. Mark was a dumbass, so he didn't provide me any sort of answer. He just wrote a note trolling whoever read it, telling them to go die in a hole or something stupid like that, and that he probably was going to die just like everyone else. How did he know? Maybe he wasn't as dumb as I thought. Perhaps he also noticed the letters. I decided to go back to the one break room where I had first discovered the letter from Jack. I again fished around reading all the letters I could find. None of them offered any sort of resolution. I was considering going to the next floor when I found one by someone with a little bit of intellect. This guy was much more thorough. He described how he was writing his letter on the last day of initiation, and how he noticed the disappearance of several coworkers. He made note that everyone who finishes initiation doesn't actually get a promotion. Then he proceeded to beg for help that never arrived. That letter was actually helpful. I looked for another one. I found one that too offered some help. There is a God. I examined it and realized it was my school's valedictorian. He stated that he wrote the letter for whoever would find it, that it was most likely the last anyone would ever hear from him. He stated how he would rebel against the bosses, and he would rather die than be subjected to whatever was going to happen next. I was puzzled by this. You see, not long ago, my wife brought in a newspaper with his obituary on it. It stated he died from natural causes, but his letter is a sign that he was murdered. Things started to make more sense now. My guess was that these people were the few that were able to find out that something horribly wrong was happening. Perhaps they had done as me and listened to the meat grinder, but they also seemed to know what happens next, the people who pass initiation. I didn't. I knew I needed to explore more. There must have been something that I was missing. I went back up to where initiation took place and scanned the room. Nothing. Disappointed, I made my trek back downstairs. As I was about halfway down the first flight, I realized there may be something on the lower levels of the building. Perhaps there was another room somewhere else. I slowly walked around the floor beneath. There happened to be another metal door. This time, it was open. It was about 4 in the morning, so all of my colleagues were passed out somewhere in the building. For some reason, a metal door was left unattended. There actually were 2 sets of doors. Luckily, both were open. I crept around the corner. The smell was awful, not of manure. I heard what sounded like farm animals. Sheep, to be specific. I peered around the corner and observed endless pens of nothing but fluffy white sheep. I was about to make my way in further when I heard a door slam in the distance. Whoever was checking on the animals must have been dropping a shit and is now returning. I made a mad dash through both sets of the door and took cover in the closest cubicle. A tall and slow figure made his way into the pens, completely oblivious. He was probably too caught up in his own mind to even guess that someone else was in the room. I listened to him enter the room over the sound of my heart pounding. I heard the creak of a cage being opened, the thump of pattering feet and buying. The man quickly turned around to shut the 2 sets of doors behind him. Now that the coast was clear, I was able to listen through the doors. Luckily, these weren't as soundproof as the factory ones. I could vaguely hear the sound of an elevator moving upstairs. As I crouched on the ground, I felt a folded sheet of paper slide out of my pockets. Damn things can't hold anything. My schedule fell out and I glanced over it one more time. Apparently, one by one, the people passing the initiation will be called as soon as the review is finished. No one has up until this point, but I thought too soon. The intercom roared to life, calling in Sam Kipper, a person in my group. He was called the initiation room, alone. I heard him making his way up the echoing staircase, and I decided to follow him. He made it to the top, and I maintained the perfect following distance behind him. I laid in a prone position like a dingus, and spied on him as he was ushered into some room that I had not noticed before. The door was shut half-assedly, so I made my way over there and peered through the small crack left open. I could see Sam seated and discussing with the manager about the promotion. The conversation went dark fast when he was instructed to step into a chamber that was hidden away in the corner. The door behind them opened as the tall man with the sheep came in. I guess at this point, they realized that the door I was peeping in through was open. The manager instructed the tall man to go close it. I meant to move, but I wasn't quick enough. The tall man saw that I was there, and of course pointed it out. I again dashed like a bat out of hell, hauling ass, and practically smashing into everything along my way. The slow, tall guy couldn't keep up with me. I knew I didn't have time to go all the way down the stairs, so I frantically hurled myself over the railing, dropping a couple floors below. Oh, it hurt like hell, but I was fine. The floors were kept short, so the building could cram as many offices as possible together. I scampered into the break room on my floor and tossed myself in the chair. I pretended that I was fast asleep. My looks are not anything unique, so chances are he wouldn't recognize me. Additionally, he didn't see me throw myself down, so if anything, the perpetrator would be on a higher level. To my luck, he never found me. But I was left in wonder of what the hell was happening. Office worker? Sheep? The chamber? What was happening? I have asked that question to the point of redundancy, but damn it, I just didn't know. That brings me to right now. I realize that there is no way out, judging by the dozens of letters. These people are militant in finding people who try to get away. All the little anecdotes of people they know who simply disappeared to prove it. I can't call the police as the phones are disconnected at night, and I won't have another day to live. Initiation is happening now. This company can cover anything up, so if I try to get away, they will find me and my voice will be forever silenced, just like the valedictorian. I would rather be the victim of some crazy experiment with a sheep than to be murdered. At least I would have some chance of living. It is only a matter of time before my name is called, so every second counts to getting my story out there. I now realize why these letters end up in the trash. The trash is the only thing in this building that is taken out, albeit infrequently. These people write their letters and throw them away so they won't be discovered by the higher-ups. The assistant managers will be on these letters like flies on shit, but they never would think to look in the garbage. The idea was brilliant, especially how I hear constant complaints about the homeless people scavenging our garbage. Man, we throw away food like crazy. Whenever the trash is finally taken out after who knows how long, the hopes are that a dumpster diver will discover them and get help. I am now one of these people. I may not make it, but at least someone else can. I feel like I am on the brink of death right now. It kind of makes me wish I wasn't such a pessimist all these years. I write this letter with a purpose, to get my story out there and make sure that this company is given the treatment it deserves. If this note is found, Please report it to the authorities. I am held by my balls. There is no hope for me. I don't know how they are going to cover this up, but if this company is capable of keeping their whole operative a secret, then they can easily fabricate some excuse for my disappearance. Just know that whatever the papers say, they're not true. I have died here at the hands of these sick bastards. Whether I am actually killed or turned into a human sheep hybrid or whatever the hell these people are doing, I am simply not making it out of here. This company wants the perfect worker, and boy are they going to get it. When my name is called, I will walk in with pride knowing that whatever happens will eventually be stopped. Maybe I should have just gone to college.